So we have even more breaking news tonight, folks, somehow. Elon Musk has announced that his time as special government employee has come to an end. On his social media site, he wrote, "I would like to thank President Trump for the opportunity to reduce wasteful spending. The DOGE mission will only strengthen over time as it becomes a way of life throughout the government." Sort of ending his role in demolishing huge swaths of the federal government with a whimper, I kind of think. But to be honest, the Trump administration never really actually cared that much about reducing wasteful spending or rooting out fraud and abuse. I mean, remember how in the literal first week of his second term, Trump unlawfully fired 17 inspectors general across various federal agencies? The job of inspectors general is literally to root out waste, fraud, and abuse within their assigned agencies. So when Trump fired those IGs, he was effectively saying, I actually don't care that much about that at all. I mean, fast forward to today, and the Washington Post reports that some of the replacements Trump has picked to fill the empty IG roles come from deeply partisan, deeply shady backgrounds. I mean, for example, Trump nominated a man named Thomas March Bell to be the Inspector General for Health and Human Services. And back in the late 90s, Bell notably resigned from a state government job after he allegedly mishandled thousands of dollars in taxpayer money. To be the IG for the VA, Trump picked a woman named Cheryl Mason, a former senior advisor to VA Secretary Doug Collins, the very cabinet secretary she's supposed to be overseeing, which seems tough. And for the Department of Labor Inspector General, Trump nominated Anthony D'Esposito, who, the Washington Post points out, is a former Republican congressman who lost his New York seat after he was accused of putting his mistress and his fiance's daughter on his official taxpayer-funded payroll. Sometimes you just can't make up the stories. Joining me now are two former inspectors general who were fired by Trump earlier this year. Mark Greenblatt is the former inspector general at the Department of Interior. Rob Storch is the former inspector general at the Department of Defense. Thank you so much for being with me here tonight. I think I told you both before we got started that I remember many days of waking up and seeing there was a new inspector general report that was going to be released. And when you're in the White House, you think, oh, something I can't say on television. And I raised that because I think the relationship, in my experience at least, and I think for most people who've worked in Democratic and Republican White Houses, is respectful but not friendly. Why is that important?
Well, you have to have some level of remove. Then an inspector general can't be buddy-buddy with everyone. We know that, we're sort of the skunk at the picnic. And that's something that we take very seriously, that we need to have some distance so that we can be independent, that we can call balls and strikes, just like an umpire in baseball, and that our findings, our recommendations will be viewed in a credible way because we're not too close with either party. That's the key thing for inspectors general, is to be independent, not political actors.
Yeah, I totally agree. In fact, I'd add, when I was at the Department of Justice, we used to say that you'd get on an elevator and everyone would get off. It wasn't quite like that.
It would be awkward on the elevator.
It would be awkward on the elevator. But on the other hand, good leaders of whatever political persuasion, I think, appreciate it when people come to them, let them know about issues and concerns and give them an opportunity to address that. In order to do that effectively, you can't be too close to the people that you're overseeing politically or otherwise.
And because your responsibility, I think you probably would both see it, is to the American people and ensuring things are efficient and there isn't abuse of power or abuse of programs. One of the criteria, and one of the reasons I'm so grateful you both are here, is it's so important for people to understand what these roles are, because they're in every White House, every federal government, not in the White House, but in every federal government. And there was a description today in the Washington Post story by someone, where a former official who said, there are basic thresholds that you need to meet in order to be a good inspector general. Have you managed a big office before? Have you done investigations before? Have you worked in this community? Is that right? What is she missing?
Yeah, it's absolutely right. And it's critically important. The law has very clear requirements about what's allowed and what's not allowed in nominating inspectors general. It's not allowed to consider political affiliation. And that's critically important for the reasons that Mark and I have talked about. If you're seen as a partisan, there's no way you can do hard-hitting oversight or do it in a credible way, right? So the law is very clear that that's not allowed, and it is very specific about what is allowed. And what is required is that the person have integrity and that they have demonstrated ability in the areas that are relevant to being an inspector general: law, accounting, investigations, and the like. And that's up to the president to nominate people like that. And ultimately, it's up to the United States Senate, which has the confirmation power to ensure that people who are in these important roles meet those tests.
I started our segment just talking a little bit about how there has been this constant restatement of rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse as the objective of this administration. Yet when you see the firing, which you both experienced, and then the hiring or the suggestion they're going to hire some of the people I just talked through, what do you think of that stated goal of rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse?
Well, it's certainly problematic. I mean, I think three of the nominees, the three that you highlighted, are very problematic, and I would say make a mockery of the entire Inspector General construct, which is at root to get after waste, fraud, and abuse. These folks are, I think, unqualified, and I would argue that their actions are disqualifying as well. So it's very, very troubling from my perspective that these nominees are for very important, significant positions. They run criminal investigations, ethics investigations. They do audits over massive programs. There's a lot at stake here, and I think the American people should be quite, troubled by these nominees, frankly. The three of them that you highlighted, they're very, very problematic.
It feels like ones people should really pay attention to. You mentioned the Senate has a role, it's advice and consent, how it all works. The Senate has a role. What should they be asking? How should they be, quizzing these nominees?
Well, as I mentioned, there are two criteria in the statute. One is integrity, and one is their demonstrated ability in the relevant areas. And when it comes to integrity, that's what have you done over your life? Do you have the integrity? I used to tell my folks all the time, we live in the glassiest of glass houses, right? If you're going to do oversight over the programs and personnel of a major department within our government, you better have the integrity necessary to lead that operation, right? And so the Senate should be asking about that. And then also about the qualifications. Do these people really have the qualifications, or are they being appointed for what are essentially political reasons? And in that regard, I'd say another thing I used to tell my folks all the time is that so much of what we do in the IG community is a political interest to someone, that it's absolutely essential that we be nonpartisan and not even have a hint of partisanship in our work.
We have to leave it there. I hope you two will come back. This is so important for people to understand. Mark Greenblatt, Rob Storch, thank you so much for joining me and for your service, too. I really appreciate it. Yes. Coming up, do you remember the Enron scandal? I bet you do. Well, one provision buried deep down in Donald Trump's big, nasty bill could open the door to corporate fraud just like that. And two people who blew the lid off one of the biggest corporate scandals in the nation's history are once again sounding the alarm. They're going to join me to talk about it when we come back.